Mark Fields, how you doing?
Great.
Welcome to the Industrialist Dilemma. So I think just to kick things off, if you want to, we just heard from obviously a lot of kind of the class around different thoughts around where you guys should take the company and what you guys should be doing. Maybe you could step back and share a little bit about the state of the auto industry and the transportation industry, and then segue into where you see Ford going through all of that.
Yeah. Well, first off, I want to start with that question, what keeps me up at night? I am so tired by the end of the night, I sleep great. There's nothing that keeps me. And first off, you know, the level of discussion and all the topics that you brought up are really spot on.
Did we miss anything that keeps you up?
You know, the one thing you did miss is the culture and the people. You know, in any business, whether you're a manufacturing business, you're a service business, et cetera, it's about the culture and the people. And you need to make sure that you have a culture that actually is going to be able to execute this strategy. Because that's that famous saying, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And you should never forget, that's the only thing you've missed. But as you look at the auto industry right now, it is, I think we are at the most transformational time in the auto industry than we've seen in over 100 years. And the reason for that is because when you look at the enabling technologies that are available to the industry today than there have been even in the last 60, 70 years, it's pretty transformational. But it's not just the technology that's changing it, because we always tend to focus on the thing, right? The technology or the product or whatever. But it gets back to people, right? And when you look at the societal factors that are out there, they're huge. And you know, every business needs to think about what the world's going to look like 10, 15, 20 years from now. So we spend a lot of time looking at those societal factors. And you look at the growth of the megacities around the world. 10 million or more people. There's like 28 today. It's going to go to over 40 in 15 years. When you look at the growth of the global middle class, it's going to double in the next 15 years. And of course, what's the first thing somebody wants to do when they get into the middle class? Let's go buy a car. So that's even more congestion. You look at air quality, right, around the world. It used to be a discussion around impact to the environment, and that's still very true, but it's also an impact to just basic health, right? You've seen the pictures of some of these cities where everybody's walking around with the surgical masks, you know, telling their kids they can't go out, or you know, elderly folks can't go down and go grocery shopping because they can't breathe. And then finally, just changing consumer habits, millennials, right? All of you, a lot of you like access versus ownership. So we're looking at all that stuff and understanding what does that mean for our business. And as we go forward, I think what you're going to see is, particularly in urban areas, there's going to be less vehicle density, right? That has implications for our business. There's going to be opportunities for how do you provide mobility in an area where there's less vehicle densities. What does that mean for our business? So when you look at that, but then also there's the other parts of the world. And you know, for many years in our lifetimes, and I think, you know, we will all be probably long and buried after, people will still continue to buy and drive vehicles the way they've had for many, many years. In rural areas, in ex-urban areas, et cetera. And it's really important to keep both of those things in your head at the same time, because it has implications for your core business, but also where you're heading. So in the future, you're going to see an industry that is going to deal with those issues. You're going to see an industry where vehicles are going to become more capable, more predictive, more intuitive, running the gamut from people that want fun to drive, but also people that just want fun to ride, right? Whether you're in a service, et cetera. So when you look at that and when you look at the competitive landscape going forward, there will be, I think, a lot of the traditional players, and Ford will be one of them, of course. But also there's the barriers to entry into this business have come down, right? 3D printing, you know, distribution models that are different, et cetera. And so I think you will see competitors in this space that you've never seen before. And you will see more and more folks that will try and challenge custom and question tradition. So it's a really exciting place, and overall what you'll see is continued growth in the auto industry. You know, when you look at the emerging markets, you know, the Chinas, the Indias, the Thailands, the Indonesias, et cetera. I mean, we are still in a growth industry around the world. And so that's the way we view it.
So how would you, let's say in 5 years from now, what would the sentence or paragraph or whatever be that anybody would use to describe Ford as a company?
Ford is an auto and a mobility company. We are in this transition right now, and it's really important because of those societal factors I mentioned. But mobility for us, first off, you have to link, and it gets back to culture and people, you have to link a mission for folks, right? It's not about coming in and designing the next widget, et cetera. And it always comes down to what is the why of your company. The why of our company, going back to our founder, is making people's lives better. Henry Ford, the reason he started a car company is because he wanted to figure out a way to democratize this technology that was only available for rich people. And he gave the ability for people to actually travel 3 miles outside of where they were born. Because most people lived, believe it or not, within 3 miles. They never went out. He gave them that opportunity, economic development, et cetera. So our why has always been about making people's lives better. And our how is about how do we enable mobility. And for us, mobility is just allowing people to live, play, and work where they want.
Right. And so as we move from, and you already mentioned sort of some of this being on demand, some of it being about access, and some of it being riding versus driving, as we move to a world where potentially transportation and mobility is delivered more as a service, that's obviously a very different world than transportation and mobility delivered as a product that I buy. How do you sort of prepare Ford for that, and what are the sort of fundamental changes in your business model, in your company DNA, and your talent that kind of lead to you guys being able to drive that?
Well, the way you prepare the organization, this is a really important piece. How do you rewire the house while electricity is on, right, with your business? And the way we're thinking about this is we have our core business, designing and developing and manufacturing great cars and trucks. And we have these emerging opportunities around mobility. And it's really a lot of it around the monetization of the use of our product. And the most important thing of how you prepare the organization is you give the organization context. You have to be out there, you have to be communicating it, you have to be linking it to how customers and society is changing. Because guess what? If you don't, and you introduce these new businesses, these new business models around mobility, and as we do, let's say we want to do transportation as a service, et cetera. Guess what? If you don't give the organization context, they're going to view that as, oh, that's all that new stuff. I'm not going to help them, right? Because that's a threat to the core business. So it has to be an and solution. What you have to be able to tell people is we're not moving from an old business to a new business. We're just moving to a bigger business. And when you get that context, because we have in our history where we've tried to go off to shiny, sexy new things, guess what? Didn't work. Because we didn't give the organization context. And oh, by the way, the people that weren't in that shiny, sexy new thing, they felt that they were chopped liver, right? Just do that core stuff and you won't be valued. So it's really important that we do that. And that's how we prepare the organization. And then you can go off and you can dedicate resources to it. You can bring in new competencies and new people. You can do M&A that will then be embraced by the organization so that you can build the business.
And how should we think about Ford's role in transportation as a service, in kind of your words? When can I download the Ford app, press the button, and have a car come to me?
Well, actually, what you'll be able to do, we are launching something in April called Ford Pass, and it's basically what we want to do there is be able to do we want that to do to the auto industry what iTunes did for the music industry. So we'll have an app. It's powered through an app, and it's a set of digital and physical experiences, so that you can serve it, make appointments for your dealership, but also at the same time we're working with partners to do smart parking. So let's say you're outside and you want to come down to downtown Palo Alto, you'll be able to reserve a parking space through it, et cetera. And we're going to build that over time so we have an ongoing relationship with our customer. But what's going to happen, when you will be able to do that, we'll still have our core business, but we'll also, in this mobility space, we are working on things like autonomous vehicles. We are working on, should we be in a transportation as a service? Should we be taking on the Ubers, et cetera? But also, remember, in business, it's all about also, are you differentiated and relevant? So, for example, we have a big, strong truck business around the world. Are there some opportunities for us on an on-demand service for commercial vehicles? You know, how do you deliver that last mile in a crowded city center? Those are the type of things that we're thinking about.
Why don't you do it?
Excuse me?
Are you going to do it?
We are thinking about those things very seriously right now.
Okay.
So Mark, as the requirements to meet customer needs change, how do you look at external partnerships? You've got a presence in Silicon Valley. How do you ensure that Ford is not one of these large companies from the outside who comes in and sets up a presence here for 5 to 7 years and then folds tent and leaves?
That's a great, it's a really great question. How we view partnerships, we have been very, very clear.
He'll ask the great
I'm
ones.
sucking up to the professor here. Okay, so it's really good to be back in class, you know? The difference at Harvard, we had no windows. It was just, so first off, as it pertains to partnerships, we have said, listen, in some cases we will do things on our own. We will decide these things are core for us. In other cases, we will decide we're going to partner with others. And you know what? That's okay. And as you think about, you know, Silicon Valley, we have decided, and we set up shop here a year ago, we are building out a very large, we have one of the largest research and innovation centers here now in Silicon Valley. And the reason we wanted to do it is, to your point, we didn't want to be viewed as some transactional company that flies in, says, I'll take one of those, I'll take one of these, and flies out and tells the organization to figure out how to do it. We want to be part of the community. We want to be rubbing up against different people and companies and generating ideas and just being viewed as part of the whole ecosystem here. So as we go forward, in some cases we will partner. And really interestingly, when you look at the technology business, look at some of the tech players. They are fierce competitors in some segments. But in other areas, they work together. My view going forward in the auto industry, and for us in particular, you could view that, you could see that future.
Do you have a framework for how you decide what is going to be core in the future versus what you are going to partner for? Is it based on like what, you know, where the margin is going to be? Is it based on what you think a strategic control point might be? Is it based on, you know, a data asset? How do you decide what is going to be core versus, you know, context?
Well, first off, we have to dimension what we think the opportunity is, right? We talked about data, right? So we, who owns the data, for example, we have to take a point of view on that, says, what can you do with that data? And then what are the opportunities? What do we think the revenue pools are that are out there? And then kind of link back and say, gee, maybe we want to be core in these 2 or 3 areas. And then we have to ask ourselves the next question, saying, can we do it better than others? And if the answer is, yes, we can, but we're going to have to add resources to our company, bring in new talent, that's one thing. But in other cases, we may say, you know what, not worth the trip. There are other companies that do this 24/7, and from a return on investment standpoint, probably not the right thing to do.
What when you think about the traditional set of partners, though, that you have, the industry for, I don't know what you'd say, 20, 30, 50 years has sort of evolved to support the current sort of industrial-centric automotive industry. And so you have a bunch of existing partners. Some of those are the dealership network. Some of those are manufacturing partners. How do you decide when you're going to work with them to evolve them into the future versus times where you might need to be more disruptive and do something yourself that you used to partner for, because that's the only way you're going to be able to create the sort of modern integrated solution?
We look at it the following way. First off, our approach is how do we disrupt ourselves before others do? And that's a really important statement to make within the company. And secondly, the second most important 2 questions that we challenge the organization with is how do we challenge custom and question tradition and not take anything for granted? And when you give the organization the permission, particularly in a 113-year-old company, to actually ask that, wonderful things happen in terms of creativity. So when you look at the issue of, you know, do we want to work with a specific supplier who we worked with for many years on a specific technology? From our standpoint, when we ask those 2 questions, then we get back to, do we want to, as we look at the opportunity, or do we want to give that margin up to somebody else, or do we want to make it core for ourselves? And those are the type of questions that we're asking. And we also have to be very honest with ourselves that says, listen, as the world changes, relationships are important, but at the end of the day, you also have to look at the business logic of continuing to work with others that you've worked with for so long, and then make very rational decisions.
If you said this is the biggest change you've ever seen in the auto industry, how do you as the CEO of the business determine where to spend your time?
I drink a lot of Red Bull. Okay, the question on how much do I spend on my time is very interesting.
Do you actually?
Yeah, I drink Red Bull.
Oh, great, cool.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Can't you tell? I spend 50% of my time on today's business, one foot in today, and 50% of my time on one foot in tomorrow. And the reason I do that is a couple of fold. One, as the CEO, one of my prime roles is to make sure that we deliver this month's sales and this quarter's financials and this year's objectives, et cetera. At the same time, the other part of my role is trying to look at the outside world and look at some of those societal factors, other factors, and try and interpret that. What does that mean for us? And then bring my management team together that says, okay, let's get a point of view on that future, and then craft a strategy that says, here's where we want to play and how we want to play, and rewind back to today and make sure we're starting to make those strategies and plans in place to give us the maximum chance of success in that world that we see. But the reason I spend 50% of my time in today is you can never get disconnected from the business. Any CEO that spends all their time thinking about 15 years from now starts not only getting disconnected from the business today, they start getting disconnected from what are the trends that they're seeing, right? Whether it's customers or in the market or with governments, et cetera. And you really need to keep yourself hardwired in that one foot in today and one foot in tomorrow.
What do you think that you have that existing set of competitors for the current 50% of your business? Do you see the Ford strategy as being differentiated relative to, let's say, the GMs and the BMWs of the world in some particularly unique way? Or do you think that everyone is sort of going through that same transition together and it's all about sort of how do we grow the total pie for this industry?
Well, we, in the industry itself, in any industry, you have to be differentiated and relevant.
Right.
And, our brand, I know there was a little bit of discussion around the brand. We have a huge advantage around the world. We have one brand. It's the Ford Oval. And in many places across the world, we have been known as a brand that is accessible. It's ingenuity, and it has a human factor to it, right? It was started by Henry Ford. The family's still involved. Those type of things. And as we go forward, we're making choices on where do we want to differentiate ourselves. We talk about our truck franchise. That is something that is very, very important to us. When you look at, for example, the other end of the extreme, our performance vehicles, Mustangs, Ford GTs, Focus RS, those kind of things. So we're all trying to search for what is our differentiated but relevant position. But I think ours is, again, a differentiated position around making people's lives better and allowing them to be mobile. And that's what we're going to be focusing on going forward.
But wouldn't Mary sort of say something similar about GM right now?
You'd have to ask Mary.
Okay, fair point. We can call her afterwards. But one of Tesla's sort of significant advantages is I think they've come up with how do you integrate a couple different kinds of DNAs into one organization. And we had Tony Fadell in a couple weeks ago.
Tony's a great guy.
Yeah, absolutely. And talking about how Nest it's hardware, it's cloud, it's software. But as you know from manufacturing, that's a very different process than doing daily software releases. How do you deal with the fact that the future of transportation is going to have multiple of these sort of work streams? Do you have to kind of integrate them together at the executive level? Do you have them run separately and in parallel? How do you see sort of weaving all that together?
Well, it's very interesting because what we learned as we were, for example, when we launched our sync system back in 2007, and we were working with Microsoft on that, what we learned is how do you deal with two different clock speeds, right? Because the way we design, develop, and manufacture vehicles, it takes literally 4 years between design to actually getting it out on the road. And so what we have to do at the executive level, we have to be really tightly linked at the executive level on how to integrate these things and understand what the nuances are and the differences are. And then what you need to make sure is the way you run the business, you have your skill teams, let's say product development, finance, purchasing, et cetera. You need to make sure that you have a process where there's a lot of cross-functional fertilization between the groups. Because we are, if you think about a car, right? It's got over 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 parts. Now you have software on top of it. We are the ultimate systems integrator.
Right.
And for those of you that know that particular skill, you really have to make sure that your organization is very tightly linked.
And do you do that at the core of the business, or do you have a sort of kind of Macintosh team, iPhone team, sort of, they're off in a corner, they have a pirate flag sort of waving above, and they can go, build the integrated car without any disruption?
Let me just describe how we're approaching the core business and also these emerging opportunities. We've had a lot of discussion around this, because if you just have, let's say that the emerging opportunities, what we call Ford Smart Mobility, which is basically our approach and our strategy to be a leader in connectivity, mobility, autonomous vehicles, data and analytics. If you have that group on Mars and you're on Venus, it's going to fail. Because ultimately, a lot of the things that you need to be successful in that mobility area depends on making sure you have good vehicles to do that. Mm-hmm. And so
But you could have a service level agreement between the two organizations.
You can, but you'll make 1 + 1 = 2.5. Or 1 + 1 = 1.5 instead of taking 1 + 1 = 3. Mm-hmm. And so it has to be separate enough so it's not encumbered by the bureaucracy, the process, all those kind of things. Mm-hmm. But you can't make it so separate that it's completely disconnected and the two can't rub off of each other and come up with even more ideas that add value to the company.
Right.
What core competency does Ford not have in-house today, or is just starting, that you think is critical for the next 5 to 10 years that you need to develop in-house and make it your own?
I think there's two that we're starting to build now in a fairly large way. One is, we talked a lot about data and analytics. And we have, about 2 years ago, I decided to make sure that we had all these great pockets of analytics in the company. I wanted to kind of bring them all together and name a leader to that, and then grow it substantially. Because I strongly believe, when I joined the company a long time ago, we were a manufacturing company. Today, we're a manufacturing and a technology company. Tomorrow, we're going to be those things plus an information company, right? As our vehicles become part of the Internet of Things, and of course, a mobility company. So that's the first one. And then the second one is skills in design thinking, right? And what I mean by that is, for many years in the auto industry, we tended to, have the headlight lamp engineer who was separately designing that from the HVAC kind of engineer, and you had different buttons, and you got in the car, you went,
we noticed.
Yeah, what is it? Not recently, I hope. No. Going forward, what I want our engineers and our marketers and our entire organizations thinking about is the experience.
Right.
What experiences are we creating today? Mm-hmm. And then what is the technology, the hardware, the software that enables that? And that design thinking is something that we're investing heavily in, and we're also our head of product development is kind of really turning upside down our whole approach to developing vehicles based on that.
If you take an experience point of view, then that's everything from the product itself and the service itself to how do I get to it in the first place. So how do you think about the dealership network and your channels of distribution as it relates to creating this integrated experience? Because certainly a Tesla gets to own end-to-end that entire experience throughout all of those touch points.
And as was mentioned earlier, here in the U.S. with the franchise law, by law, we cannot go direct to customers. At the same time, our dealers, we have 10,000 dealers around the globe. That is a huge advantage. I think somebody mentioned, the whole issue about having a distribution network. Mm-hmm. So the way we have to do this, first off, as we go off on this journey, we have to bring our dealers with us. And we have to say, what is your role as we go forward? Right? Because you're good partners for us. Mm-hmm. And let's face it, I know we talk about being a little bit in a bubble here, but let's face it, folks, you're not going to hit the buy button and then a vehicle's going to show up. People want.
Actually, Patrick Collison from Stripe said you would be able to do that.
Well,
in first class.
There's a difference between you could do it and people do they want to do it. Right? It's the second biggest purchase you're ever going to make after your house. Right? You're going to buy your house online? People want to feel, they want to
CEO
touch.
Zillow said that.
Well, no, I talked to him. I went and visited him, and he said that's a good revenue opportunity. I said, not for us. But first off, it's also, again, it's about people, and it's about giving the organization context. So we're spending a lot of time with our dealers and saying, here is the way the world is changing. You have a choice. Do you want to work with us, right? Because it's the customer who's in charge, not us. Do you want to work with us, and how do we outfit the stores going forward? I mean, somebody mentioned, the stores could be very different going forward. And how do you bring them with us, as opposed to we're going to do it separately and we're going to break the law and we're going to create World War III with our distribution network? That is a recipe for disaster.
What do you, just out of curiosity, what do you see their role being then in 5 or 10 years when we're in this sort of mobility on demand kind of world?
Well, again, you're making big assumptions here. Sure. We're going to, 20 years from now, right? The world is going to be populated by these autonomous roaming vehicles in any part of the world. You'll hit your smartphone, your button on your smartphone or your iPhone, and it's going to show up. Guys, it's a spectrum, right? There's going to be people that are going to be driving vehicles that we've had for many years. Yes, there will be a growing segment of that. Right. So, their role, our dealers' role going forward will be continue, right, to take care of the customer, right, to sell them vehicles when they want to buy vehicles, but also to service vehicles when they have to. As we think about transportation as a service, what role do they have? We're working our way through that, but they will play a vital role. Look at Amazon, right? They're creating retail. Think about this. Amazon was born online.
Right.
What are they creating now?
Stores.
They're creating stores. We have 10,000 dealers or stores around the world. That could be a huge advantage for us.
How do you hire people with different DNA into the organization and make sure that they stay and don't come for 18 to 24 months and then decide to go back to where they were before?
This is a really important question because it's the war. It is.
It's a very important question.
Listen, everybody heard the term. Name the term. War for talent, the best team wins, all that kind of stuff. So how do you do it? First off, what you do is you want people across every cohort, but it's a lot in the millennials. They want to make a difference. They want to make their dent on the universe. Yes, they want to be compensated appropriately, et cetera. They want to be at a higher mission. And our mission is about making people's lives better. And what better way of doing that is not only developing great cars and trucks going forward, but helping solve some of the world's most pressing societal issues around mobility. And then secondly, you develop them, and you also have to have a realization. Like here in Silicon Valley, we used to be a company, if you decided to leave Ford Motor Company after 5 years, you were excommunicated. Don't ever bother coming back. First off, here, we've recognized a couple of things. One is a lot of people join companies here in Silicon Valley. They don't join companies, they join projects. Right?
You have to get pension in Silicon Valley after 5 years. So.
They join projects. So we have to be comfortable as a company knowing that in some cases, we'll rent people for a while. But at the same time, we also want to tell them, you can come to Ford and go from one project and do that for a year, 18 months, whatever. Go to the next project. You can have a great career at Ford. I'm an example of that. I never joined Ford thinking, one day I'm going to live in 4 different countries and have all these experiences. I never thought I'd be able to do the things I've been able to do. In my 27 years at Ford, I've probably had 8 careers. And that is something that we want to give people a mission, but also they can have a great career at Ford and work on something that they can point to, not a line of code, and say, I did that, I was part of that. That's really important to folks.
When, as it relates to Silicon Valley and kind of Ford's relationship to it, so GM obviously recently invested in Lyft. You guys there's been rumors about big partnerships that you guys are doing. There's some announcements at CES. How do you think about the role of sort of corporate venture capital in going into startups? Do you see an opportunity right now? What kinds of companies would those be? And then ultimately, I guess, if there's anything you can share around what you expect your relationship to be with a Google, I think there's a lot of curiosity around that.
Well, I think on that last one, there's lots of speculation out there. And what we've said is, listen, we talk with everybody. I spend, our folks spend a lot of time here. I spend a lot of time here. I probably know, all the same people you do now in the tech space. And, we talk with some we work with, some we just talk with, and obviously for competitive reasons, we're not going to, I'm not going to, talk about, who we're doing things with for, obviously for confidentiality reasons.
Right.
But so there's an elegant way of that question.
But is it like, are you hanging out more in Mountain View or like Cupertino? or do you go to
Hey,
Lincoln a
I
lot?
just like coming anywhere here. It's winter back in Detroit. But when you... So what was the first question again?
Okay. First question is, are you going to invest or buy Lyft
venture.
or Uber? Or
I think you have to be very strategic about those things. I mean, I'd rather be ahead than fast. And what I mean by that is when you think of venture, I think you have to link it first back to what are those big bets that you're taking as a company, your strategic big bets. And we're going to talk more about that as a company over the next year or so. You have to link it back to that. And then secondly, on venture, I think you have to be careful, because if you decide to invest 10% in company X or company Y, and then 6 months later you see a different technology and you're like, wow, I'd really like that, but oh my gosh, I kind of already have this investment here. I think you have to be really careful about that. That's different from full M&A. Right? As you see something, you say, hey, it's a competency I don't have. It's a skill set I don't have, and we realize we do want to make it core. You go out and you integrate it into the company. So I think you have to be careful, and different strokes for different folks depending upon the company.
Could we expect any of this from Ford this year, you think?
Oh, from our standpoint, you will see us get more aggressive around M&A.
Cool. Awesome. All right, Mark, thanks a lot. Really
Great.
appreciate it.
Thanks.